Before dawn, the Trident ran black with the night's last shadow. The surface rippled with wind and the soft breath of trout nosing after gnats. Banners slept along the bank like windless sails. The grass was bent where the men had dreamed, and the cook's smoke clung low above the camp as if the river had hauled a net of fog and would not give it back. Jon stood at the water's edge with Ghost for company. The direwolf's white coat almost blew in that hour when light is a rumor. The current talked in the stones the way old men talked in a hall. Quiet at first, then grumbling, then suddenly loud and sure, as if the river had decided to contradict the day. The rubies were somewhere under it all. Men still came some summers to wade and search and stab the bed with little forks, as though a dragon prince's heart had fallen to pieces here and could be gleaned like garnets in a miner's sieve. Jon had heard the tale as a boy and again as a man, and the sound of the water made it easy to see it. A male-bright kingling broken in crimson rain, a hammer blow like thunder, the river claiming and keeping what it had taken. But the river kept other things too. A name, a mistake, a promise never given. It kept memories that had not yet ripened into words. He listened and he thought he could almost make them out. Ghost leaned against his thigh and huffed a thread of breath that silvered in the cold. "You hear it too," Jon said. The dire wolf blinked his red eyes and lowered his head to drink. The river did not pause for him either. Behind them the camp stirred. Men doused coals and slung helms after bread and small beer. A groom cursed the temper of a horse. A boy laughed and then choked on his laugh when an elder's hand cuffed the mirth from him. The Manderley men sang under their breath as they cinched girths. They had a tune for everything, and even their humming sounded as if it were negotiating a price. Davos Seaworth came down to the water with his boots unstrapped and his toes bare, trousers rolled to his calves. He looked at Jon before stepping in and making a face at the cold. "I sailed colder," Davos said, "but seldom with such clean toes afterward. Salt scrubs a man whether he likes it or not. A river is gentler, gentle until it takes your feet off the ground. You can ask any drowned man about that." Davos lowered himself onto a smooth stone. Even there he kept his back to the camp and his face to the river's talk, as if it were a ship he'd once run and still listened for her creaks and complaints. "He's come." Jon turned. A man stood beyond the brush of alder with the dawn behind him. He was not tall, and the twilight of the reeds colored him into the river's own. He wore leather dark with oil and a shirt that might once have been green. Mud had dried in a lace across his shins, as if some bog had tried to keep him and failed. Howland Reed's hair was brindled as winter sedge, his eyes the wary brown of a marsh hare. He carried a frog spear and a bundle wrapped in oiled silk. "You took your time," Jon said. His voice came out softer than he meant. He had not seen this man since he'd been a boy of 14 and smaller than his sword. Even then Howland Reed had made no sound in leaving. "I come at the river's pace," Howland Reed answered, and his mouth cocked in a smile that did not entirely reach his eyes. He looked at Ghost and bowed his head as if acknowledging a king. "Your father kept a white wolf in his heart. I am glad to see the world still has one to bite it when it needs biting." "My father kept many things," Jon said. He could feel the weight of the morning press upon him then with the weight of a word unspoken. He nodded toward the bundle. "And you have kept yours." Howland held the package like something that might be harmed by speech. "I kept it for the right water. Rubies, oaths, and ashes are all alike. They harden at the wrong touch, they sing at the right one." He stepped nearer and you could smell the green on him, the memory of wet reeds, frog skin, and peat's sour sweetness. He unwrapped the oiled cloth and more cloth within that. Jon had forgotten how fine his hands were, thin and nimble and almost girlish until you saw the scarring along the knuckles where spear haft and bowstring had worried the skin into tough ropes. A square of old parchment lay within the final wrapping, brown sugar dark, edges scalloped with age. There was a scent of bees and smoke. Howland did not press it into Jon's hands. He set it upon the stone near the water and weighted 2 corners with pebbles. "I know what it says," Jon said. "You know what you feel it says," Howland said. "Words are bones. They need some meat on them before they can move, and the meat is in the hearing. Read." Davos looked at Jon and then away, and Jon took in the hush of the camp, the thin birdsong, the river's conspiracy. He knelt. Inside, the letters crawled, tired and thin, but they made a strength all the same. There was a Septon's name and a date that carried more winter upon it now than when it had been written. There were two names coupled. One he had worn all his life without knowing its fit. The other had hung about him like a cloak that didn't belong to him and yet smelled of fireside and father and a rough hand on his shoulder. He did not speak the names. They blossomed behind his teeth and refused the air. "It will cut two ways," Davos murmured. "A sword is a poor tool for a man who will not let it cut," Howland Reed said. "But a reed makes a poor spear if you don't harden it in the fire first." He wrapped the parchment again, hands thoughtful. "She will come before midday." "She?" Jon asked, though he knew. "Arian Nimeros Martell," Davos said, as if he were rolling the sound for splinters. "Sunspear's heiress. Ariohoda with her, no doubt. A spear with a beard. Prince Doran's daughter," Howland said. "Nymeria's blood is clever in her. We do not know how much has been told to her. We will be careful not to teach her what she could sell us later." Jon straightened and the world took on the size of the day. "I won't sell myself," he said, and that was not to Howland or Davos, not to the river, not even to the camp behind him, but to the thought of a throne and to the boy that had looked south at towers and guessed their weight. Davos stood and nodded. "You'll have to give some things all the same. There's no pact without some giving. It's like marrying a ship to a sea, or a river to another river," Howland said. He was smiling again. "Come." The world stirs. A ford is a mouth and both shores want their word in it. They went up among the alders to the camp. The Tully trout span upon blue and red hung above the command tent, and beside it the crowned wolf of Stark that had once seemed a jest to Jon even when it ceased to be. Around those heavier banners clustered others like lesser fish, the merman of White Harbor, its bearded face chortling, the bear of Mormont with a cub in its paws, the flayed man of the Karstarks appealing to no one's taste, the long ship of the Glovers, its oars lifted like ribs, and river lords with cattails and kingfishers, sturgeons and bent bows. Edmure Tully had ridden out from Riverrun a day ago with a hard tiredness to him and a baby's silk caught in his sleeve as if the child had clutched and would not let go. The Blackfish had ridden harder, and now his tent stood as far from Edmure's as blood allows. Wyman Manderley sat on a stool like a throne that had given up and become a stool, eating an apple with unbelieving respect. "These Riverlands apples," he said when he saw Jon. He did not stand. He wagged the apple like an orator. "You cannot trust a man who eats so little of them. They have the memory of summers inside. I taste barley and girls and hay in this one." He bit again and closed his eyes to listen to his mouth. "Ah, and wasps. It is a great apple for wasps." "Lord Wyman," Jon said. "King." Lord Wyman stopped himself and smiled as if he had caught a fish when his line had been empty. "Lord Jon. Titles are gnats too. I will shoo them if they come too close to your ears." Davos cut a glance at Jon and then the banners. "We do better this if we hold the ford with your lord's men on the left bank and the Tully levies on the right. The Dornish will not like standing where Freys can shoot them from the north. They'll want the sky at their backs and the water in front, same as any man. The Freys will want to do something spiteful. They are the only ones certain to play true to form. The Freys have forgotten they own no bank that we do not let them keep," said Brynden Tully, stepping quiet as a thought between tents. His eyes were steel and his mouth was the line an archer draws when the bow is old. "We hold the ruin they made us. That is worth something at last." Edmure joined them with a little boy's cloth still knotted about his wrist. He did not seem to realize, and so no one told him. "If she means to come," he said, "we should not force her to climb into our quarrel before she has crossed the water. We can receive her at the south edge and escort to the ford ourselves. The Freys have sent riders north toward the twins already, and I do not want to give them the pleasure of thinking they made her steps shorter." "How many Freys?" Jon asked. "Enough to spoil the day with," the Blackfish said. The morning widened. Word came from the pickets that riders had been sighted on the south road, moving like a serpent under torn clouds. Jon went to the far bank with Edmure and Davos, and a knot of manderly men whose bellies shook when they laughed and whose hands were quick enough when the joke was at someone else's expense. They arrayed themselves where the ford fanned out in white sleeves over brown stones. Here and there in that wash a spark flashed when the sun shouldered through the clouds. The lie of a ruby too quick to be caught unless you were a boy. The Dornish came with their spears in bunches and their cloaks bright as peeled oranges. Their flags snapped as if impatient with the wind, and at the head of the column rode Arianne Martell under the spear and sun, Areo Hoda to her left like a small mountain with an axe at the summit, and 3 sand-colored girls in riding leathers about them like hawks circling a lord's fist. Jon knew them by rumor, if not by name. He guessed at Nymeria sand in the quickness of the eyes, and at Obara sand in the economy of the chin that would not waste a word upon a man who wasted them on her. The third looked almost demure behind her veil and probably was the worst of the lot. Arianne drew her palfrey to a halt when the water licked its knees. She was not taller than Jon, but the seat and her way upon it gave her inches. She had the dark summer that Dorne taught its children to wear and a smile that asked you to pay for it and made you happy to be robbed. She studied the ford, the stones, the archers Jon had placed and where their eyes had chosen to pretend not to look. She studied Jon afterward. "You are younger than the river," she said, "but not by as much as you wish to be." "Neither of us chose our making," Jon said. He stepped to the fore, the water at his boots. "We laid the stones as best we could. You have come to my ford." "Your ford." She did not make it a question. "My father had a saying about fords. They belong to whomever bleeds in them last." He would not be wrong. Would he not? She smiled again, the poor man's son, and inclined her head not quite far enough to be a bow. "I am Arianne of Dorne. This is my father's guard, Areo Hoda. You know one another by reputation. I hope the reputation is unworthy and the man better." "I am Areo Hoda," the guard said simply. His voice was a drum in a well. "I serve, obey, guard." He looked at Jon as at a fortification, then at Ghost. His eyes softened by a degree you could measure with a crane's hair. "The wolf will not bite me." "He doesn't bite men who say what they mean," Jon said. "We have both brought many words," Arianne said, "but I will not bring them to the water's middle and drown them there. May we cross, Lord Snow?" Jon felt the name land. He let it be and nodded. "You may cross, and I will have you call me Jon. Another man might ask for more." She clicked to the palfrey and the horse stepped with clean assurance into the river's push. Hoda came after, the 3 girls following, and then Dornish men whose lances made a bristle of cold glints. At the north bank, Edmure and Brynden waited, and Wyman Manderly had somehow made his stool appear upon the grass near a table that had not been there a moment ago. A salmon had appeared as well and was surrendering its red to the knife as if it had always been meant for Lord Wyman's mouth. Banners moved behind them as a good tapestry does when a wind is in the hall. "Lady Arianne," Edmure said, stepping forward. He made a courteous half-bow that did not look like a servility and did not exactly look like a welcome. "My hall keeps no poison for your cup today. Today is a day for cups we can all drink," Arianne said. "If we can agree on the wine." "We will drink the river," Jon said. He felt Howland Reed draw up behind him without sound and knew Davos was at his shoulder because he could hear the thumb rubbing at the missing fingers. There are wines that put men to sleep and wines that make them fools. This water wakes. He led them a little way down the bank where men had set broad boards over stones and planted posts to make something that did not look like a platform until you stood upon it and discovered the river had pried you from your land without asking. There were 2 bowls upon planks, one carved from weirwood white as new bone, its lips stained with old red, the other from some hard desert root polished to a shine and striated with amber like sand petrified. A man could have sworn that light pooled a moment longer in the desert bowl and that sound slowed over the weirwood. It was not sorcery. It did not need to be. The men saw what they wanted. A hush took the knot of lords and knights and the farmers unlucky or lucky enough to have given fealty to houses that had dragged them all to a river. Jon set his hand upon the white bowl. Arianne placed hers upon the desert bowl and her eyes were not smiling now. Howland Reed came and set his parcel down as he had by the water. He did not unwrap it yet. He looked to John for leave, and John nodded. Howland's voice was not large, but it carried as though the river had made itself his pipe. I am Howland Reed of Greywater Watch, who sat with Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, upon this terror called a land, and fought with him, and saw him keep an oath and break others for pity. I bring witness for the sake of the living and the dead. Brynden Tully shifted, and his face made a decision. Edmure looked at his wrist where the baby's cloth was knotted and untied it slowly, as if he had been given a task that mattered. Howland unwrapped the oiled silk with its patience, and this time he did not lay the parchment down. He kept it in his hands. There are words on this, and a seal that broke when the hand that pressed it grew tired. It is not the first seal to break in Westeros. The gods will see another a day after the last throne falls and be no wiser. But these words are the ones that concern you now. He looked at Arianne Martell without challenging her, and looked at Jon with a tenderness that did not pretend to understand what it may be to be a boy all his life and find himself another man with the sun up. I will read them. Jon did not realize he had started to shake his head until Davos touched his elbow. Let it come how it comes, the Onion Knight whispered. There's no clean way to fall in the river either. Howland read. The language was a Septon's careful piety wedded to a practical man's need to be exact. There was a date. There were 2 names joined before 7 witnesses in a little sept hidden by wind and sand, and the Septon had named them as husband and wife, not as playthings for a tourney ground. There was the name Lyanna Stark, and there was the name Rhaegar of House Targaryen. A whisper rose as if the river had found a sharp stone to talk over. The whisper dropped away as if the river had swallowed that stone and made it smaller. Arianne Martell did not speak at once. Her face changed so little that the change seemed a kind of violence. She looked at Hoda, who did not move, and then at the 3 girls, whose eyes said 100 different things until you saw what was the same in them. A burning, a what have we not been told burning. You ask me to walk on a blade, Arianne said. I ask you to know where the edges are, Jon answered. He put his hand into the weirwood bowl and brought it out wet. He raised it so the water shed from his fingers ring by ring. My mother was Lyanna Stark, daughter of Winterfell. My father was Rhaegar, son of the dragon. I will not pretend those names do not bleed one another in the mouths of men. They bleed in mine. It is no news that Dorne has cause against the dragon, he said, and watched the shiver move through the Dornish ranks as a field ripples with wind. But my mother bled too. What was done at the Trident ended more than a life. It made a wound in 2 peoples who were cruel to each other long before the hammer rose and fell. I stand at that wound now. I stand because I am the cut. Silence had a taste then. It tasted like a coin a man had held too long, warm and dirty and hard to spit out. It is a fine argument for a song, Arianne said at last. She put her hand in the desert bowl, and when she lifted it, the drops looked like glass without color. What do you want of me in prose, Jon of the North? A pact, Jon said. Not a bending of knee. Not a surrender of our laws to each other. The North and Dorne have long been the furthest shores of this realm, mocked for being cold or hot but never understood. We have little love for kings who sit where the rivers meet and drink what others draw for them. We have less for frays that watch the water and make the world pay to pass. You propose a river where there has been a wall, said Brynden Tully. I propose that when winter rises, the desert does not sneer that snow is weakness, and when summer comes, the winter does not sneer that heat is madness, Jon said. I propose that Dornish spears and northern axes answer as one when one is bled. I propose that trade pass through our lands in safety by our word, that White Harbor's fleets and Planky Town's ships carry grain and fruit and wineskins and wool without Fry or Lannister or Kraken setting tolls upon them. I propose that Rangers of the Sands come to learn the snows and Rangers of the Snows to learn the sands. So when the world's weather turns, a man of Dorne is not undone by drift and a man of the North is not murdered by thirst. And when King's Landing calls? Arianne's voice did not much change, and yet the camp seemed suddenly made of tinder. When King's Landing calls, it may be to demand, Jon said, or to plead. I propose we do not answer as children to a father who forgot our names. We will be neighbors to the riverlands in truth, and we will treat the Vale and the Reach like neighbors too, even when their lords forget to be neighborly. I propose the wolf and the sunspear face the world not as man and wife who must make heirs, but as partners who make a road where there was none. You talk of roads. Roads run through other men's bread. Arianne spread her wet fingers. And you bring me a marriage with no marriage in it. It is a day for truth, Jon said, and felt Howland Reed beside him breathe and Davos go still as a lit match. Marriage is a net, catche. As the wrong fish as often as the right. I will not say the word so you smile, and then find you are snarled with me in a winter neither of us chose. But I will send children of my blood to be fostered in Dorne if you send children of yours to the north. We will make our manners out of each other until our hatred finds it cannot remember all its reasons. Arianne looked toward Hoda then. He said nothing. He did not need to. The incline of his head meant, the shape of this makes sense. I cannot taste the poison in it, and so it is not that kind of wine. Prose, she said again, and her mouth softened by a notch that was not a smile and not forgiveness. You will give me a harbor's worth of timber for ships to be built at Planky Town. Nordic pine that does not rot like our palm if the worms find it. You will see that a fair price is struck at White Harbor and no Manderly takes the salt in his blood as license to cheat. You will guarantee safe escort for caravans through the neck, and the Crannogmen will be priest and judge both when fools take swords to disputes that belong to words. In return, the desert will give your white towns every crate of oranges and lemons they can choke down for the scurvy you fear comes with winter. We will send maesters to Winterfell who remember that a body can burn from inside when the sun is too strong, and you will send us maesters who remember that lungs can freeze. We will keep the water clear together. You ask for much timber, Wyman Manderly said. He had finished the salmon and was chewing bread as if he were suspicious of it. We are not a wood. We are not fools, Arianne returned, and Lord Wyman smiled for the first time as if at a daughter who had managed to come home with both the purse and the horse. Done, Jon said. He did not look to his left or right to seek permission. He had already weighed the offense. Done and done again. But I will have a thing as well. There is always a thing, Arianne said, the heat returning to her mouth. When the Freys try to spill blood upon this ford today, and they will, you will not hang back to see if their aim is better for the Dornish than for the Northmen. Have I a reputation for hanging back? Her brows rose. Keep your insults for your friends. They will forgive them. You have a reputation for having cause, Jon said. So do I. If we cannot together forget a few old reasons for bleeding, we will never have time to learn why we do not need to. Areo Hoda made a sound like the beginning of laughter and then killed it where it stood. He speaks like a man who is going to work today and does not wish for songwriters. Song will come whether we like it or not, Brynden Tully said. Let it not be fry song. They brought forward the cups. Howland Reed filled both from ladles dipped into the river itself, one for the Weirwood Bowl, one for the Desert Bowl. Jon took his cup. Arianne took hers. They stood upon the boards over the water and raised the cups. Jon thought of Ned and the steady hand that had taught him his first blade and the promise that had undone the last of Eddard Stark in a world that had demanded he be more than a father. He thought of the ghost of a girl whose name had been in the breath he took when he ran and played as a boy. He thought of the dragon whose name had been a story told across fires and in halls and never in his own mouth. To the river that remembers, Jon said. To the sand that does not, Arianne said, and together they drank. The first arrow came singing as if the river had learned another song in the last heartbeats. It struck a cup from a boy's hand and the boy squealed and the cup flew like a gull with its wing broken and fell into the Trident. The second arrow took a Manderly man low in the gut. He bent like a strong grass and his hat fell off. Men shouted and dropped and found their feet again. The platform swayed upon the stones like a barge that wants to be free. Shields! Brynden Tully roared. Shields! The word became the whole camp's mouth. Men ran to their work the way habits do. They knew where their shields had been sleeping. They knew where their friends were. They knew which enemies would leap too far and drown. Ghost exploded white beside Jon. A torn winter running. Hodora's axe blossomed into his hands, as if it had always been part of him that had chosen this time to show itself. Across the ford, men in drab river mud livery sprinted to the lip of the bank, dropping to one knee, drawing to cheek, letting fly. The distinctive scuttle of fry helms caught the light. Too many cheeks, a nose like a spiteful child's drawing, and a foolish birthmark of vanity on the metal where no soldier ought to carry decoration. Jon saw a familiar face among them. A fry who'd been at the Twins on the night of song and knives, his mouth lolling in a half-laugh as he shot. A man too pleased with himself to understand what a river is when it decides to speak. Jon's hand found Longclaw's hilt, the leather warm, the bear-turned wolf white upon the pommel seeming to grin now. He drew, and the old Valyrian steel both sighed and rejoiced. It loved the morning. He had thought sometimes that steel like this could think. It thought in the taste of the air against it, in the way his arms settled at once. Down! Davos barked, and pulled Jon half behind a post as another arrow kissed the post instead. Arianne had not dropped. She had thrown the cup aside and stood with her veil free in her hand. Now she looped it about her left arm, not to hide her face but to wrap it, pulling it tight with her teeth the way a fighter binds a hand. Hoda stood just behind her shoulder. He did not waste a word telling her to move. He would be her shadow when the light fell and before. Into the water, Jon said. Push them out of their holes. They cannot stand and draw on stones that move. He leapt from the boards and the river took him past the knee. Cold sky swallowed and shut about his legs. He felt the pull and bared his teeth at it and went forward anyway. Manderly men went with him, their shields a quick roof. Brynden Tully's archers replied, making the air near the Freys tremble. A riderless horse plunged into the ford and then out, panic making it leap with joy that knew no cause. A scream rose to Jon's left and stopped fast, as if its mouth had been shut by a fist. Jon saw the boy who'd lost his cup. The lad was barefoot now, his shoes lost in the mud. His eyes were wide as empty bowls. He clutched his forearm blood-black. "Home," he said to no one. "Home." Davos had him in a breath and was knifing the sleeve away with a fisherman's care, the missing fingers smooth and deft as if they remembered themselves by doing. Arrows made waterpouts where they fell. Jon lifted his shield and let two make themselves harmless in its belly. He came up like a swimmer in a winter's pool, and the Freys who had thought the river would hold like a nailed floor discovered it was as treacherous as any promise they had ever given. Jon reached the bank in 3 strides that nearly took him down when a rock slid under his boot. And then he was up and among them, Longclaw's whisper a clear thought. A fry lunged and existed no more as a creature with a plan. His helm gaped, and red made a soft slip around his ears. Another, older, gaped for breath as though it had run away beyond him, the flat of Jon's blade having turned his ribs aside from their work. Ghost came over the bank as if he had become the river's froth, half made of white water, and took a man at the back of the knee. Hoda did not cross with grace. He crossed like a piece of dawn falling, and the first fry who tried to take his legs discovered what it was to be the middle of a treatise on axes. Arianne's eyes were very dark as she came across, not so much a woman's eyes as the desert itself asking, "Who comes?" She had no spear, but she moved like one, and in her hand there was a long slender blade that Dornish girls surely did not keep under their pillows, unless their bedmates did not complain of knowing it. Her veil-bound arm took a slash that would have cut her to the bone and lifted it aside as if it had been a mosquito's wand. She went knee to knee with a fry who had been the terror of some small village by the way he grinned over pig teeth, and she put the slender blade where grins can learn better manners. The air sang, "That is what battle is, a choir gone mad. Men make their lungs into instruments and bleed because of the notes." Brynden Tully appeared among the bracken above the Freys, his men with him, and suddenly arrows from the north bank were coming down at different angles because the Blackfish had found the better ground and seized it as a good thief takes a silver he knows he can sell to the very man he stole it from. Freys began to run back the way they had come, which was down and into rocks. Some cursed the river as if it were a man who might take offense and yield. The river did not yield. It never has. A fry who had held his nerve and his place lifted a horn to blow a retreat, and Hodora's axe made a door in him that he would forever afterward be opening. The horn fell and rolled, bouncing over stones like a child's toy, and came to rest within reach of Arian Martell. She bent. She did not stoop and picked it up. The sight of a Dornish princess with a fry horn at the trident seemed to take all the logic from one man, who stood there smiling as if at an ant before he remembered she was not one and that the river had gotten behind him without asking. He jumped. He could not swim. By the time the camp's dust had settled and the two bowls were righted and the wounded laid in lines like fresh-dug furrows, the sun was high enough to make the rubies in the stories seem as if they might after all leap and wink at a boy's toes. Davos came to Jon with blood on his sleeve that he had not earned with his own body. He shook his head once. The boy who had cried home had been given one, the last any of them would recognize. Freys learned a thing, Davos said. They learned they don't own rain, Jon said. His chest tugged with the breath he had not entirely caught. Longclaw was clean and sleeping again. Arianne came to him. She had washed her face, but there was a smear of someone else's day under her jaw. She did not rub at it. She let it live there a while longer. "It is a joy to sign with such good ink," she said. "Let us drink another cup." He did not smile. "Let us drink many. There are dead, and the river will carry them. We are left with words." They returned to the platform. The posts still stood. The boards remembered their place. The cups were filled. The camp had that low murmur again that is not quite grief and not quite relief, and the smell of iron had not yet burned off. Howland Reed placed the parchment upon the planks, and this time he did not read. He set the weirwood bowl over it, as if laying a stone upon a grave, and then lifted it away again. The parchment was unmarked. The gods had not thought to write their own commentary. "By the waters of the Trident and the sand that remembers a step better than a tide does," Arianne said, "Dorne will recognize the North's right to keep its own justice and gods. We will answer each other's summons when called against invaders foreign and domestic, with spear and ships and good sense. We will share knowledge of heat and cold, that our children do not die of what our fathers died of." How does the North answer? Jon's throat was tired. His voice found a strength. "By the breath of the North and the deserts burning," he said, and a Manderly man beamed because the words sounded like proper words to him, and Edmure's mouth made a shape that almost wanted to be laughter if it had not also wanted to cry. "We pledge the same. We will carve timber with a fair hand and sell it for a fair price. We will open the causeways through the neck to your caravans and guard them between reed and rush. We will send our highborn and our low to each other's halls until the sound of a northern laugh is common in Sunspear and a Dornish curse is as ordinary as snow in White Harbor." Wyman Manderly licked his fingers. "Snow in White Harbor is indeed ordinary," he said. "We can teach your curses to be just as common, I think." They drank, and this time no arrow interrupted the human pretense that ritual can tame a world. When they had finished, Arianne Martell offered Jon the fry horn. "Do you blow it now?" she said. "Or do I?" "We blow nothing that belonged to them," Brynden Tully said. "We will make our own horns." "Your river is lovely," Arianne told Brynden. "It may yet teach me to forgive some things." "The river forgives nothing," Brynden said, not unkindly. "It carries and does not comprehend. That is our work." They set to the work then with a craftsman's fuss. Messengers went off like meadowlarks to Riverrun, to White Harbor, to the next silent keeps, to Sunspear. Men who had been sent from the Freys to watch and mischief left the bank with less news than they had hoped to gather and discovered that their return would be through woods where someone had moved a log across a path that was there yesterday, and a hole had been dug today where there had been only earth. And they cursed the Crannogmen by names they were not sure belonged to a people and not to a swamp's indigestion. Others went foraging and found that, for some reason, rabbits had not consulted their maps that morning. Jon spent his afternoon learning the measure of the woman who had claimed the day as if it had been cut for her. Arianne Martell walked the bank with him while Davos did the counting men do when they want to be sober, and Howland Reed did not disappear, but he was the kind of present that is always almost gone. "You talk as if you could keep your foot in two boats and not get your arse wet," Arianne said once the uglier bits were behind them. "Do you know what that is?" "Foolishness," Jon said. "Practice," Arianne countered. "I grew up with my father making practice of not falling into a sea." he would not name while his sons drowned themselves to spite him. Is he a fool or a saint where you come from? I don't come from where you come from, Jon said. He looked at the water. It bunched about a slow boulder, gathered itself, and ran on with its mind changed. I come from a keep that pretended a bastard is a fine thing to have in a hall if you remember not to say his name too loud. I come from a wall where men's hands froze to ropes because they needed the rope more than their fingers. I have had enough of saints. I am content to be told I am a fool if the work gets done. Her mouth considered that. Do you intend to tell the world your father's name as if it were yours? I have told it, Jon said. The words had a weight he had not given them and took some back now. If men make more of it, that is their work. I will not hunt a chair some call a throne. A chair is as good as the man who sits it and as bad. I have seen men sit stools with more justice. And yet he was your father, Arianne said gently, as if remarking upon a bruise that had not purpled yet. And yet you are alive because of him and because of your mother and the choices both of them made. Jon nodded. When I was a boy, I would have given my feet to hear what you say as an insult, he admitted. Now I am a man and it sounds like a prayer. Prayers are for women and weak men in my country, Arianne said, then winked without sweetness. And for kings who will not call themselves that because the word frightens them. The word doesn't frighten me, Jon said. He looked at Ghost, who had found sun on a rock and was asleep with one eye not entirely so. What sits behind it does. Hoda appeared without appearing and walked beside them for a time like a teacher who will neither approve nor disapprove until the lesson ends. There is an old road, he said finally, speaking to Jon because he had done that calculation and found Jon the current that moved stones. It runs from the bones of Summerhall north through the Stormlands and crosses to the King's Road. We can move men upon it who will not be seen. They will not be called an army until they stand, and then they will be an army and it will be too late to object. I tell you this because your enemies know it, and if you do not know it too, you make me ashamed of my acts. Do you intend to move an army on it, sir? Jon asked. Not unless you bid me, Hoda said. But I will move my lady's friends and the children she trusts to the Riverlands. I will teach them to guard your caravans so that when you think the Crannogmen have done all the hiding there is to do, you will learn Dorne's particular way of showing itself only when it wishes. We will pay that price in timber, Jon said, and Hoda smiled in his beard, which looked like the last place a winter could cling upon a man. They came upon Brynden and Edmure arguing quietly about what to do about the Freys who were not at the bank. I have no wish to spend good blood in a boast, Edmure was saying. Every man we send to the twins has a wife or a sister waiting to hear his breath again. I would rather let the Freys rot in their stone and have them open their doors when the smell offends even them. I have no wish to give them more seasons, Brynden returned. Every spring gives vermin new ways to find the grain. You cannot run a farm on mercy. You run a river on mercy or it buries your land, Edmure said. He saw Jon and Arianne and bowed his head as if the bow belonged to the conversation. This is a matter for Tullys, Brynden said to Jon, politely as a man closes a door gently in your face. It is a matter for river lords, Jon said, and I have become one by accident. Do not deny me the gift when I am trying to treat it like more than a bright ribbon. Arianne looked at the two men and then away at the water. Dorne knows a thing about rotting, she said. We have had our share of fruit that looks perfect and then opens to wasps. If these Freys are ripe with their own poison, leave them. But if they send riders out between your harvests, you will have to swat. My father used to say, strike the hand that steals before you strike the man that sent it. The hand will learn. The man will send fewer hands. I will take that counsel, Edmure said. He sounded tired enough to ask his horse to carry his bones in a sack. And for the sake of this day, I will invite you to my hall. We will eat bread. We will say our vows in a more comfortable place where the river cannot wash them away. I will show you a son who hates the sound of his own crying but still believes in it. They went to Riverrun the next day along a road that felt like a scar with nerves exposed. The fields on either side had been cut by too many boots, some of them 7 years old and still fresh in the grass's memory. High upon a bluff a hawk circled, bored and thinking about nothing, knowing more death than any man below. The keep lifted its red stones out of the river's fork with that familiar stubbornness Jon had loved in its men. The look of a fish refusing a hook simply because it had decided that morning it loved its own mouth more than the bait. Ghost walked with the kind of swagger only beasts have when they do not know that men envy it. Inside, the halls had been brushed and dressed, but the smell of old siege was in the wood. Men think they hide smoke and sweat and fear, but a hall remembers everything. Edmure's wife met them, a soft-faced woman with a tightness under the gentleness, as if she had learned to smile with a new set of muscles. A babe slept at her breast and refused to be convinced to do anything else. "We are honored," she said to Arianne, "and we are honored." Again to Jon, though, it meant different things both times. At table, Lord Wyman Manderley somehow ate less and yet seemed to occupy more of the meal. The Blackfish drank like a man who does not trust wine but cannot bring himself to be rude. Davos sat near the lower end and spoke with a cooper as if their labors had always been equal in the eyes of people who did not know the difference between fingers and gold. Howland Reed ate with a slow, mild attention to each bite like a man building a thing out of small pieces where each one mattered. Arianne took a little of everything as if she didn't quite trust northerly bread to agree with a southern belly, and yet was determined to learn the argument one way or another. "You have a mouth that knows when to close," Wyman told her at last with unfeigned admiration. "You will do well north." "She belongs south," Hoda said mildly. "A glance, sir," Vima murmured. "A glance. I have great admiration for glances. They know more than stares." He leaned to Jon. "When we talk price at White Harbor, I will make a great show of going poor when I cut the timber. Watch me. It will be very amusing." "I will watch," Jon promised, and the old lord guffawed until his belly's laughter threatened to overturn a trencher. In the days that followed, the pact hardened into nails. Edmure drew from his saddest lords what escorts could be spared to run alongside caravans to the neck and beyond. Arianne's riders took notes on widths of paths and water holes that were under the roots of birches. Messages came and went between Sunspear and the Trident that did not say all they meant for fear of the birds that carried them would read. Jon wrote to Sansa and signed not as king and not as bastard, but simply as Jon, and he told her the day's shape and sent a bit of ribbon he had cut from the Dornish princess's veil because he thought it would make Sansa laugh at him and he wanted her to do that. He wrote to Lady Mormont and knew she would not laugh and sent her simply the terms and a request for her most sensible niece to be sent to Sunspear to frighten them into liking the North. Wyman Manderley penned letters to men in Old Town who could smell profit from 3 markets away. He attached to one that same wasp-eaten apple core he had dried and kept, as if to say, "Here is our future in a shell." Davos wrote nothing. He walked the river and spoke to men who had seen hard coasts, and to boys who had never seen the sea, and to farmers who kept their own counsel, and to whores who knew a city better than their mayors did. He sang a sailor's song when he thought he was alone. He was not alone. Arianne Martell sent a raven to Starfall, and for 3 nights Jon dreamed of a sword pale as winter carried across a desert that never has existed in his world, only to wake and find that Ghost had crept in and put his head on Jon's boot to claim him from his own mind. It rained on the 4th day, a rain out of a clear sky, a summer rain that had forgotten itself. Men took off their helms to feel it, and a Manderley sergeant danced, making a fool of himself that made him a man. Arianne stood barefoot in it, her hair down, and when Jon came upon her she was laughing with her mouth open to drink. "We measure rain differently at home," she said to him, wiping her lower lip with the back of her hand and not caring how ungallant the gesture made her. "This is like being kissed by a friend you thought dead." "When I was a boy," Jon said, "I pretended snow were 1,000 little hands teaching me how to be cold. I thought one day I would learn. I am not sure I did." "You learned a different lesson," Arianne said. "How not to choose the wrong heat when you find it." She spun once, quick as a girl and not at all like one. "I wonder whether Rhaegar ever stood in rain like this," she said, just enough words to make the name a hush. "I wonder whether Lyanna did." "They would have liked it," Jon said, and then, surprising himself, "they would have laughed." A day later, a courier from White Harbor brought maps Lord Wyman. had had his men draw of woodlets that could be felled without making a god curse a man, with little mermen sketched in the corners that crept into the sober work as if to suggest even serious things could be improved by whimsy. That night, the Blackfish taught a company of Dornish riders what a river does under moonlight and how a man's foot must learn new compromise in the dark. Areo Hoda stood in shadows and watched with the kind of attention that leaves a man's enemy's little breath to waste on boasting. On the 7th day, a spear of men in squirrel-gray livery came down from the neck, their boots stained with that secret mud that carries a smell of something older than men. They brought with them 3 girls and 2 boys, the eldest no more than 15, the youngest having a tooth that had failed to find its place among its fellows. They were Howland Reed's cousins and the cousins of his cousins besides. They were thin and bright-eyed and unawed. One of the girls looked at Arian Martell and did not curtsy. She nodded because she had been told that was polite and she would not learn a lie if she did not need to. "We come to be traded," she said. "Fostered," Hoda corrected her gently. "Traded?" she repeated, and Arian laughed not in cruelty but in recognition of boldness. "You will like the sand if you do not try to eat it," she said to the girl, "and the sun if you do not take it for granted." "I do not take much for granted," the girl said. "We don't in the neck. The ground moves. So does the desert," Arian said. "It moves more slowly, but it is stubborn. You will teach each other your favorite cruelties." "And kindnesses," Howland Reed murmured, and if he meant the children to hear him, they did not show it. They were looking at the world beyond their world, and they were not afraid. By then, the letters had gone far enough that answers began to return. From Sunspear, a long, slow hand wrote, "I was told a boy would one day be 2 rivers. I did not believe. I am too old to be angry at this. I am pleased to be correct and angrier yet. We will do as the girl instructs so long as she remembers who has beard in this hall. Not because it is better, but because it is what is. From White Harbor, a cheerful scribble. Send your list of shipwrights with names of wives and children, for I suspect they are the ones I must truly pay. From the Vale, a tidy hand. We have no cause to involve ourselves with either Northern or Dornish experiments. From Old Town, a drone of laconic complaint that changed halfway through into a shopping list of the exact number of masts and sailcloths that would do, which is to say money talking sense to itself in a voice meant to sound like disapproval. From King's Landing, silence that weighed more than words. From the twins, a gilded letter that had swallowed every 3rd syllable of its own sarcasm. We congratulate Lord Snow upon his learning his letters and the princess upon her learning what they are for. Arian read that one twice and smiled without mirth. "The best insults are honest," she said. "This is not one of those. An honest fry is like a maester's cat," Davos said. "He may exist, but I wouldn't show my throat to him." Near sunset of the 10th day, a rider out of the east came pale with dust and unslept. He wore no colors. He had ripped them from his jerkin and left the wrens to say what tongue he had used. He wanted Jon and would give his news to no other mouth. Jon took him into a small stone room with a slit of a window that smelled of mice. The man drank and shook, and when he had made of himself something like a person again, he said, "They are marching, Lannisters and Stormlanders with banners half-eaten and half-proud. They don't fly one king. They fly a crown because they think the word keeps the sun from going down." "How many?" Jon asked. "Enough to see the dust from here if it had not rained 3 days ago," the man said. "They thought the ford would still be yours to guard. They bring enough wood to make a new bridge if you deny them." "Their business is with King's Landing?" Davos asked. "Their business is with themselves," the messenger said with the bitter certainty of a man who has been a soldier too long. "But if you slow them, they will make it with you. There is pay in it. There is always pay. They do not want Dorne and the North to make their own coin." Jon let the words line up, each one a man in a file waiting to be counted. He dismissed the rider with food and a pittance that would be a feast to him, and then went out among the people he had accidentally become a kind of king of. He found Arian already assembling her riders, their faces composed, their hands busy with making sure their work would not be interrupted by some stupid strap failing. He found Brinden looking over a map, as if the map had wronged him, and Edmure considering the way a river chooses when many little mouths try to tell it where to go. "They will not pass here if they do not ask," Jon said. "And if they ask nicely?" Arianne's eyes were bright with a light that was not quite joy. "They will not pass here," Jon said. "We are not a road for kings who have forgotten how to walk." They made their deployment with the patience of a loom rather than the violence of a hammer. The Dornish took the low scrub east of the ford where they could be sun and shadow both. The north held the deeper bank where their feet liked the feel of it and where ghosts of winter kept men polite. The Riverlanders prepared deadfall logs upriver, tethered to release and go like a sermon when the moment needed its moral. Men set caltrops under the water where hooves would learn humility and cut jerky in strips like flags so they could chew and not lose breath to the sort of hunger that makes thoughts thin. In the hour before daylight, Howland Reed stood with Jon upon a knoll where foxes had made a home. The old earth humped and the new grass less certain than it pretended. "You have had 10 days of being what you are," he said. "That is 9 more than many men get." "It does not feel like a feast," Jon said. "It is the feast," Howland said. "All the rest is the meat. This..." He swept his frog spear in a quiet arc that took in the river and the men who would make it more than water. The desert riders whose eyes were fixed the way a man's eyes must be when he has given his heartbeat to a purpose and wants it back. The banners that were not waiting for wind but creating it by their wanting. "This is the table. Eat what you can before someone kicks it over." Jon smiled and then let the smile go. He thought of the boy who had wanted to be a lord and then a brother and then a word men could use that would not sting in the saying. He thought of a girl's promised crown of winter roses and a man's promised song of summer, and of what happens when songs come due. The Lannister vanguard came under tatters that once were crimson and now were the respectable brown of men who have not had time to wash their ensigns. With them came storm lords with blue and gold banners that shed threads when they snapped, and sellswords whose flags declared nothing but the sewing skill of the woman who had been paid to make them. Jon stepped where they could see him. There are times when a man must be a sign. The morning made him one whether he wished it or not. A captain with a lion-faced pauldron made new money of his voice. "Who holds this ford?" "The people who live here," Jon said, "and those who came to keep them from being killed for the convenience of people who do not." "We have orders from the capital," the captain said. "So do we," Arianne said, too sweet, "but ours are written by our own hands. By authority of the hand of the king and the council." The captain tried again. "We demand passage across this water in peace." "Peace is not yours to demand," Brinden said. "You may request it. Then you may pay." The captain's jaw worked. He looked at Jon and made a calculation that ended with him wanting a smaller problem. "By whose leave do you deny the realm?" "By the North's leave," Jon said. "By Dorne's leave." He felt the day pivot then on that small word that had once been a mere preposition and now seemed a lever you could pick up a kingdom with. "By the leave of the Riverlands whose bread you have ignored when it was put into your mouth." He lifted his hand and the men by the deadfalls made a little show of checking their knots. Men check knots for themselves, but they also check them for audiences. The captain looked at them and looked at the Winterfell wolf and the sun spear and the leaping trout. He licked his lips in spite of himself. He had known himself brave an hour ago. He was discovering a new definition. "We wish to pass," he said, smaller. "We have coin. We wish you to go back the way you came," Arianne said without venom. "We have a pact." For a long time there was only the sound of the trident making its old speech again. Ghost padded up beside Jon and showed his red tongue. The captain's horse shied, and the man patted it as if seeking to calm the animal while calming himself. Then he nodded, angry and clever enough to be alive tomorrow. "We will ford to the west," he said. "We will remember this. Remember that you were warned," Davos said. "It will look better in the song." They did ford farther west. They tried to lay a bridge. The river took 2 of their rafts and made a point. They did not starve or die of thirst because that is not the sort of story the gods write for large companies of armed men when the gods are feeling merciful. They simply found themselves delayed and made fools, which is, in another way, the same wound. The North and Dorne held the Trident. not as lords and ladies alone, though there were enough of those. As the folk who drew water there, and the folk who walked through, and the folk who took whispers and turned them into maps, and as girls from swamps learning to sit a saddle like a sand steed, and boys from deserts learning to walk in snow without making mistakes that would kill a man between one breath and the next. They made a small piece of the realm behave itself, and sometimes that is all the realm deserves. At dusk, Arion stood with Jon again where a bend in the river let the water pretend it was slowing. The day's work had not given them leisure, but it had given them a long look at themselves. "You have given me a story to bring south," she said. "You will make it better there," Jon said. "I will make it different," she corrected, and a little sad. "Differences matter. They are how men keep their heads upon their necks." She touched the fry horn she had made someone hang on a post near her tent, a reminder of stupidity, the way some men keep the skulls of animals they have tricked, not even killed. "Would you have me stay and learn to call the cold by its names?" "Yes," Jon said, and smiled quick because the word was as easy and impossible as any he had used that week. "But you will go." "I will," she said. She looked at Ghost then, as if the wolf were easier to ask. "What shall I bring you when I come again?" "Hot sun in a bag," Jon said, "and a song that makes men behave as well as we did today." "Such a song has never been written," she said, "but I will ask." She held out her hand and he took it, palm to palm, the rivers wet still in the grain of his skin, and a hint of citrus oil in hers that had clung despite the ford and the fight. They did not draw each other closer. There was a pact between them now that was not of flesh. When she rode south, she did not look back until she was over the small rise that made the Trident look like a different river entirely. Then she turned once and saw the banners and the boards and the bowls upon them, and the white wolf lying on a rock with his eyes open, and the young man beside him who had put his name into a hard place and left it there like a stake holding a tent against weather. She went on, because that is what you do when the work is not finished. Ravens came and went. The world continued to be itself, ungrateful for the work men did to keep it tidy. But when winter's first hard breath rolled down upon the world months later, making lips crack and children nosebleed with a kind of surprise that was no surprise, there were lemons at White Harbor and oranges bundled in straw on carts to Last Hearth. There were southern maesters at Carhold who did not teach the wrong remedy for a death that looked familiar to them but was not, and there were northern healers in the shadow of Sunspear who taught men how to sleep with wet cloths placed not to freeze them, and how to listen to the way a cough changes when it means to kill. There were ships that made the long haul around the Cape under banners that paid no toll to men who had once thought their name was a toll. There were girls with reeds braided into their hair in the Shadow City who walked with a gator's stillness and laughed like ice breaking. There were boys as brown as cinnamon at Deepwood Mott who learned that being hot is not weakness. The Freys hung their horn in their own hall and did not blow it because they had learned a lesson they would call cunning but was nearer to shame. The Lannisters counted and could not make their sums manage the number called, "The world does not care about your sums." In time the Pact took root the way an olive tree does, slow and stubborn and making fruit when it chooses and not when asked. Kings came and were buried under the different names men feel they must give their mistakes. Jon went north again and the river kept speaking. It had liked being used for a noble purpose and did not mind going back to being a place where fish went about their business in a current that had forgotten kings. Arion became the sun under which men learned to walk less arrogantly at noon, and when she was mocked for that by the sort who call any woman's dignity a trick, she smiled and asked the mockers if they preferred her laughter or her memory, and waited until they understood the difference. Once each year, twice, if the roads were not too miserable, she rode to the Trident to stand upon the boards a carpenter's son kept sound as his pride. She and Jon would put their hands into bowls again and drink in a ceremony that became as natural as men measuring winter's depth against a fence post. They did not speak Rhaegar's name or Lion as often. Names are stones, as Howland had said, and sometimes you do better to learn the stream's bend than to keep lifting the same rock to see if it looks different in new light. But they never forgot the shadow they were made from, and they never allowed a minstrel to turn horror into sugar so thick a child would choke upon it. Howland Reed sometimes came and sometimes did not. He always walked as if he were not there even when men saw him. The children that had been traded grew into people with two Weathers in them. One, the crannic girl with the stubborn chin, married a man of Ironwood because she liked the way he listened to water in amphory to decide if the clay had been tempered right. When he died, she went home and wept and then did not, and said to her new son, "There will be two deserts in you, the hot and the cold, and if you try to choose one you will be sorry." Another, a boy who had never seen a date before Dorne fed him one, went back to Winterfell and became a mason who never again built a hearth without a little place for a bowl of sand, because he said every fire should remember it is not the only way a house is warmed. In the end, the Trident was only a river. In the beginning of every day it still is. But some mornings, when the sun is low and the mist makes it look as if rubies have floated again to the surface and boys wade for them knowing they will not find any. If you stand where the boards still stand and put your hand in one bowl and then the other, you will feel that one kind of water and then another, and you will remember a day when two old wounds learned to share a scar. Ghost will blink at you as if to say the world is large, and the laugh of a woman you might call princess or not will be in the reeds long after she is gone. And if you listen, truly listen, the river will tell you the same story it told Jon Snow when he stood at its side and believed it was talking only to him. That all waters meet, whether men will them to or not, and the only wisdom is to give them a place where doing so pays more than it costs.